Hello, my name is Addison Pemberton. It's November 9th, 2000. We've yet to elect a president. And we're here to talk about a wonderful piece of history in the form of a 1928 Boeing Model 40 mail plane. And to give you some brief history, we're kind of at a ground base here with the beginning construction efforts of a new fuselage and eventually a flying airplane. What's in front of me here today is one of 81 Boeing 40s built by the Boeing Aircraft Company between 1928 and 1931. They were used to run airmail routes, particularly CAM 8, Commercial Airmail Route 8, from Seattle to San Diego, and CAM 18 from San Francisco to New York. The mail pilots, until the development of these more advanced mail planes, primarily carried the mail with de Havilland World War I bomber DH-4s that had been reworked for airmail service. By the late 1920s, airplanes with more capability, more load-carrying capability, more reliable engines, better instrumentation began to come of age. Boeing, Stearman, Douglas, Pitcairn, some of the great names built some of these wonderful airplanes. This particular airplane began life with Pacific Air Transport, a division of Boeing lines, specifically operated on CAM 8, that Seattle to San Diego run, and operated with the 12 original Pacific Air Transport pilots. And the story begins on a very cloudy, overcast morning, October 2nd, 1928. The airplane's only been in service since mid-July 1928 and is flown by a handful of pilots. And on this particular morning, the airplane has left Northern California and is brought into Medford, Oregon at 9:10 in the morning by Art Starbuck. Art Starbuck unloads 3 to 12 pounds of mail from the forward mail compartment, possibly a passenger, and then the airplane's handed over to another Pacific airmail pilot by the name of Grant Donaldson. And Grant Donaldson is accompanied with a single passenger. And in front of me, we've got a rear passenger compartment, which is closed with a side door that I'm standing in front of, that contains two passengers, which are staggered so they get adequate shoulder room. This area to my left is a second closed cabin area, again with staggered seating, with a bit more room. Perhaps a first-class section of the airplane. The pilot to my far right would have been Grant Donaldson that morning. They depart and they're headed for Portland, Oregon. And within an hour of the flight, Grant Donaldson finds himself scud running with very low overcast ceilings, very limited visibility. And near the town of Canyonville, Oregon, he's following what was to become Highway 5 at a very low altitude, slightly west of the road. And as he looks down over the right side of the airplane and is looking to follow his road and his path, he begins to clip treetops. And I can imagine a frantic power application and attempt to climb up out of the terrain is futile. He travels quite a distance as this enormous airplane is cutting down treetops as if to be a giant scythe. And the airplane noses in quite violently. The initial hit is the left front quadrant of the airplane, the left gear leg, left wing, and the airplane literally buries itself in the side of a hill and begins to burn. And within seconds, I can imagine that Grant Donaldson, we know this for a fact, has left the rear flying position and worked his way around to the side door that I stand to the left of, and is frantically trying to pull Donovan from that front cockpit. He's been killed by a blow to his head, the seatbelts being very inadequate. He's hit some structural tubing, and he's been killed on impact. Donovan, then 54 years old, the passenger, owns a lot of real estate. He owns pharmacies, he owns property, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in Portland, and maybe Seattle. We're not sure of that. He's also an amateur diamond dealer, and sitting to his right is a small black leather bag, probably full of diamonds, interestingly enough. Donaldson, 37 years old, 3,000 or 4,000 hours of flying time, probably World War I trained, is frantically trying to get him out, discovers that he's been killed, and is burned badly about the face, hands, and scampers away from the airplane, works his way down to the road, which is less than a mile, and is intercepted by a preacher and his daughter in a Model A headed north. They take Donaldson to the town of Canyonville, which is 8 miles to the north of the crash site, and they take him to a pharmacy, and they've got him laid out on the floor, and there's a frantic phone call back to the dispatcher, the station manager back at Medford, Oregon, where he's taken off probably a little less than an hour earlier. And we've got logs, we've got this telephone record of this phone call where Grant's badly burned. These people are trying to get him whatever medical attention they can. They realize that the passenger's been killed. It's just a terrible event, not all that common during those years. Shortly thereafter, the local people in the Canyonville area salvage the back part of the airplane. The last 12 feet of the airplane is hacksawed off and taken down to the town of Canyonville, and from what we're told, placed in an elementary school as a jungle gym for children to play on. And that's lost forever. The airline has come and taken whatever diamonds they could, whatever might be useful from the airplane, and the crash site is virtually then undisturbed until the 1990s, when a man named Ron Bartley, a geologist by profession, has been studying and trying to find the Canyonville mailplane crash for many, many years. He stumbles upon some United photographs which show the crash site, and being a geologist, he's able to triangulate the approximate position of the crash and discovers it in the early 1990s. So it's virtually been undisturbed from the late 1920s until the 90s, which is just amazing. A side note, I tried to locate this airplane in 1982 unsuccessfully. Was told that the airplane was salvaged in late 1928. In fact, we find out now it's only the tail section. So what we're actually looking at is the remnants, the Jurassic remains of this original airplane. What we're going to do now, you know some background, you know where we're going with this whole effort. We're going to break and look at some photographs that describe some history and describe some original photographs before the accident. We've got pictures of Grant Donaldson. We've got some of these airmail records which authenticate which we've just discussed. We've now moved over to one of the work tables here in the hangar, and I want to take a minute. We're 6 months into the project to date in what we call Phase 1, which will be the initial construction portion of the airplane. And without the help of EA, a contact to Oregon Historical, the project, the acquiring it, moving it to Spokane here would have never happened. The folks at Oregon Historical Aviation Society were able to relinquish this project with the idea that we'd truly do something with it. Ron Bartley, the man that discovered the airplane, has been invaluable in supplying me with historical background information, newspaper articles. He's the one that found these records that we're going to show you here in a minute. The next thing I want to talk about briefly is the construction technique of the airplane, which makes it doable from an amateur hobby standpoint. We've got a lot of great resources here in Spokane. A lot of people are going to help make this project happen. Behind me here are the first of many microfiche drawings which have been blown up. This project is doable for one of three significant reasons. Number one, it is truly documented. There are literally 300 detailed drawings that describe every piece of structure, every piece of wood, every detail in beautiful, maintained condition. This has been a byproduct of the Boeing archives with the help of a man named Michael Lombardi, Keith Laird, Pete Bowers, and Jim Morrow. These people have brought a lot of information to me in the last 6 months. Secondly, first being that the airplane is documented. Number two, the airplane is constructed entirely of round tubing and flat stock, so it's a fabricated construction. There are virtually no, but just a few, castings and forging, which make it an amateur buildable airplane. The third thing that makes the airplane wonderful is the power plant. It's a variant of the very popular Pratt & Whitney 1340 series, which is still used today. So we've got this wonderful piece of historical airplane with an engine that's still available today in even a more reliable variant than original. We've got a construction technique that's buildable in an amateur type environment, and thirdly, it's documented. And again, if I direct you to this drawing for a minute, all of the tubing structures, centers, there are infinite details for all of the construction technique completely available. The amazing thing about the airplane is constructed of 4130 chromoly tubing. We've also learned in the last 6 months, I am absolutely amazed at the state of the art of the technology of the time. The flying wire fittings, the throttle quadrant, turnbuckles, even the screws, nuts, bolts, is hardware we find in World War II vintage airplanes. I had no idea that AN type flying wire fittings, streamline fittings, structural members, elements, primers, even some of the instruments are amazingly evolved by 1928. We're now going to move over to some photographs and describe the airplane in a bit more detail. This first picture shows a Model 40, and it's in Varney Airlines livery. And if you know from airmail history, obviously, Varney, Pacific, National, and Boeing Air Transport had eventually become United Airlines. So Varney was a subset of one of these partners, if you will, in these Boeing lines. In this picture, you can see clearly we've got a rear cabin, which this young woman is exiting. Forward of that is a second cabin where two more people sit. We've got one woman on the stairs here and two folks, with the pilot here in his office facing forward. The wings have no stagger. They're virtually in line with each other. The fuselage from about station 3, just ahead of the leading edge of the wing, clear back after the rear cabin, is parallel, meaning that the wing, cabane, and landing gear fittings are very riggable. The airplane is virtually a rectangle, which makes it very buildable. Massive amounts of tube structure carry the wing, gear, and upper wing loads. And the airplane tapers down to support the engine and tapers back to support the tail section. These airplanes had a very, very reliable history. Imagine, if you will, riding in these closed, tight cabins with turbulence and the smell of gasoline and burning oil and stinky, leaky carbon monoxide. I'm sure these people were violently airsick before they left the pattern to their next destination. I just can't imagine riding, bumping along the thermals in the afternoon in the Midwest in one of these airplanes. And they had a very good, reliable mechanical record. They certainly drove them into a lot of hills, weather-related, but from a mechanical standpoint, they were very, very robust. The next picture shows a Model 40, again in Varney livery. You notice the name of United has now appeared. This young woman is standing in front of the Spokane terminal here at Phelps Field, which is of particular interest to us because we're based here at Spokane Phelps Field. These Boeing 40s were germane to the Pacific Northwest. They ran east, west, north, south. So it's going to be a real pleasure to get this airplane into Pacific Air Transport colors as it originally was and campaign the airplane throughout its local area. Here's a photograph of 5390, which is virtually identical to the airplane we're building today. It's a C model. It has a 1340 Pratt & Whitney. Just after the engine is a mail compartment. Just after the mail compartment is the front cabin, the larger of the two cabins, which hold two passengers. After that, a smaller cabin with 2 additional passengers, the flying position, and then we're 13 feet back to the rudder, 23 feet to the propeller, which is just amazing. Notice the exhaust stacks run all the way back the full length of the airplane and dump back just ahead of the flying position. Large muffs pull heat off of those exhaust stacks to heat the cabins. In the summertime, these long stacks are removed and they dump the exhaust straight out. The radiant heat was kept away from the passenger compartments to keep the heat away from the folks, which is going to be relevant here in a few photographs. So note the long or the short stack configuration being winter and summer. The tires are enormous, as you see here. This next photograph is the same airplane, 5390, a Boeing 40C, exactly what we're building here. Notice that the doors are missing on the right side view of the aircraft. These are windows which slide open. You can stick your arm out the window and wave at the folks as you cruise along at 100 miles an hour, or throw your air sack out the side of the airplane if necessary. What you can see here on the side of the airplane, this is the aileron cable which runs outside the fuselage cross-section and then exits the wing and operates 4 ailerons. Notice that the rudder is not aerodynamically counterbalanced, nor is the elevator. So you can imagine this airplane has very, very heavy control surfaces. We actually have a pilot report from a Boeing 40 pilot, and he says the controls are as if they're cast in solid concrete. So I imagine the airplane probably flies pretty crummy. But it's beautiful, so we're going to build it. It's got to be done. Here's an airborne picture of 5390 once again. You can see the long exhaust stacks. You've got a V landing gear with a cross-section drag tube affair, and the oleos are contained within the landing gear assembly here itself. Again, you can see the front and rear cabin positions, the mail pit, the 1340, in this case a Wasp-C. The C Boeing 40C variants of this airplanes had 450 horsepower. They must have been pretty anemic. The later Boeing 40s upgraded to 1690 Hornets, 1690 being the displacement with 525 horsepower. We'll be taking our airplane and putting a late model AN1 1340, a 600 horse, derating it to 525. We've made minor changes to the fuselage construction to accommodate the greater horsepower. I just can't imagine, with a fixed pitch, ground adjustable propeller, and 450 horsepower on a good day, lumbering the 6,000 pound airplane off a 1,200 foot bumpy strip somewhere in the Midwest. Just seems beyond comprehension. The next photograph shows an interior shot of the flying position. And of interest, as we take a quick tour around the cockpit, we've got control stick, obviously. Rudder pedals in this early version of Boeing 40 are a rudder bar affair. If you look up and to the left, we've got left and right mechanical hand-operated brakes, which is just where you want your throttle hand just prior to a ground looper landing. The left side of the cabin then includes a throttle quadrant, which incorporates a throttle, a spark advance, and a mixture control. After that is a fuel selector, which selects fuel from the lower left, lower right, or upper wing. After that, a wobble pump for fuel pressure. These big knobs here are a trim wheel. We come over to the right. We've got 2 individual hand-operated cranks for lowering the landing lights in each wing independently. And I imagine in a crosswind, you could get creative and lower the appropriate landing light to help with some drag and crosswind tolerance. But I just can't imagine landing this airplane in a crosswind with hand-operated mechanical brakes. We're going to go with a later design variant for safety, and we've incorporated foot-operated toe brakes, which will be hydraulic. And I've actually got a picture, or I'm holding here in my hand. This is a replica fabricated rudder pedal, which our friend Rick Illingham has embossed through an EDM process, the Boeing logo. So this will be incorporated in the project. To the left, you'll notice, believe it or not, Clixon World War II-like believe it or not, switches. The mag switch here, notice that we've got 3 1/8 turn coordinator. Some other Boeing 40C models, we even see a 3 1/8 vertical speed indicator. We've got the classic early to mid 1920s 4-inch airspeed tach and altimeter, and we've got a 3 1/8 clock, 2 1/4 instruments here for fuel pressure. So again, I was quite surprised to see the 2 1/4 and the 3 1/8 instrument standard appear as early as 1928. By 1929, they had adapted the 3 1/8 and 2 1/4 instrument standard pretty much across the board. This crank here on the right is the winter shutter, which opens and closed, followed by a primer, and these are all the starting controls for the electric inertia starter. So that's kind of a tour of the cockpit. I guess you're checked out to be very careful and give it the gun. The next picture now is extremely significant to what we're doing, because what you're looking at is a photograph now of Grant Donaldson. This is the gentleman that we described who was flying the airplane the morning of the accident. He is standing on the wheel of 5339er, and that's our airplane. Until now, you've not seen any original pictures. This is actually the airplane that we've got here in the hangar, 5339er. And that's significant. Its fleet number on the tail was fleet number 23. And as you look at all these references to these airmail flights, they refer to this aircraft as ship fleet number 23. And that's significant, so remember that if you will. Grant Donaldson is shaking Bill Boeing's hand, which is just amazing. And we figure this picture, remember the airplane went into service in the middle of July 1928. It's still got the short stacks. It doesn't have the big heater muffs connected. So this was taken probably sometime between July and the middle of September. The next photograph is extremely significant. Note the date here, September 13. This is a mere 2 weeks prior to its demise. We figure the airplane probably has less than 100 total flying hours on it. And you'll notice here again the absence of the long exhaust stacks, the 2 cabins, the Boeing logo. It says Pacific Air Transport Boeing Lines. Again, the affiliation here is with Boeing aircraft. Back on the tail, it's fleet number 23, and it flies U.S. Airmail Route CAM, Commercial Airmail Route 8. And if you remember, that's from Seattle to San Diego. The next picture was quite a surprise to us that we were able to come up with this photograph, compliments of Jim Morrow. And if you look carefully, you're not going to be able to see this in the video, but there's the numbers 5339er written underneath the left lower wing. So this again is our photograph of our very airplane. And notice the long exhaust stacks are now installed. This picture was probably taken within a week, perhaps even days of the accident, which is just amazing. We don't know who any of these folks are in this photograph. We're not really sure what airport this is. We may find that out. Perhaps Portland. There's another Boeing 40 over here to the left. Just an amazing piece of history. The next photograph, these are the original 12 Boeing Air Transport pilots, Pacific Air Transport pilots. In the lower right-hand corner, this is Grant Donaldson. And just to give you some background on Grant, we talked about him possibly being a military-trained pilot during World War I. We know he had about 4,000 hours. He was 37 years old the day of the accident, again October 2nd, 1928. He never flew after that accident. If you recall, there was a fatality. Mr. Donovan in the front seat. Grant Donaldson never flew again. He was burned very badly. We know, and I've interviewed some of his friends, including today, amazingly, he spent his entire adult life with a badly scarred face and hands, had a perfect outline imprint of his helmet and goggles till the day he died. The gentleman I talked to earlier today worked with Grant Donaldson from 1942 to 1962 as a dispatcher for then United Airlines. And he said even when Grant was very old, I mean in his late 70s, early 80s, he still had no wrinkles. I mean, he was, because of his scarred face, he looked exactly at 80 years old like he did when he was 40 years old, which was absolutely amazing. And he's got this perfect imprint of his goggles and helmet, which is just amazing. Another thing of interest in this photograph, here in the middle is another Donaldson. This is Grant's younger brother. His name is Flavis Donaldson. He's killed in 1929 in a Boeing 40 on Cam 8 in the Gorman Pass between Bakersfield and Los Angeles. So we've got two brothers here, both Pacific Air Transport pilots, one with a tragic accident that was survivable and a second fatal. Flavis Donaldson, on the morning of his accident, evening rather, had a mechanic with him and an 18-year-old girl who had been given a trip on Pacific Air Transport by her parents as a graduation present from high school. She was going to Portland to visit a friend. They get in a weather situation. By 1929, they've got radios, and he's screaming on the radio trying to find some weather before he runs out of fuel, and the airplane crashes in Gorman Pass. It isn't found for 4 days. In the upper left-hand corner, this is the man, Art Starbuck, that we talked about early on in this presentation. He was the man that flew 5339er, our airplane, into Medford the morning that he handed the airplane over to Grant Donaldson as he proceeded northbound on Cam 8. So that's a lot of interesting facts here. Of the 12 Pacific Air Transport pilots, many of these folks are killed by 1931. It's just amazing. I mean, just the story repeats itself over and over again. They're virtually scud running every morning. I imagine they're getting ill before they climb in these cockpits and launch off for some terrifying ride with victims or passengers inside these airplanes. The next photograph, which we're going to scale in here, this is going to be a bit difficult. This was taken by Ron Bartley from his Hatch biplane, and this is actually Highway 5 as we see it today. And off in the distance is the town of Canyonville. It's 8 miles up the road here, preceded by Roseburg, Oregon eventually, Medford being at our tail about an hour's flying time away. If you look to the left of Ron's wing here, you can see a small circle with an X. That's the crash site. We're talking about an airplane that's literally a fraction of a mile from the crash site to Highway 5, virtually undiscovered for nearly 60 years. People were driving up and down Highway 5. If they knew right where to look, they could have found this thing if they had Superman vision. I've personally flown up and down that corridor for many, many years, passed right over this airplane, had no idea what was there. Again, we owe a tremendous amount of tenacity and appreciation to Ron Bartley for finding this beautiful piece of airplane. I'm going to turn this 90 degrees now, and this is actually a photograph of 5339er that very morning. There's a fire here, possibly as a result of the crash, possibly a campfire by the Pacific Air Transport mechanics that are trying to salvage these diamonds and maybe some parts of the airplane that they could retrieve. A note on these diamonds, just briefly, Pacific didn't recover all of the diamonds. They remained there at the time of salvage, where the townspeople brought the tail back into town. And there's rumors to this very day, there's widows in the town of Canyonville with diamond rings, engagement rings on their wedding ring fingers to this very day that probably came from this the legend of the Canyonville Boeing mailplane crash. And I think it's a true story. It's going to be very difficult here, but take my word for it. Here's a picture of the, again, unbalanced elevator and rudder affair with the number 23 Cam 8 written right on here, big as life. The airplane is covered, obviously, with either cotton or Irish linen. It's nitrate dope. The fire is so violent that it's burned all the fabric off the airplane and extinguished itself before it burns the tail up. We're talking about a flash fire that's so violent the nitrate dope doesn't even take the tail off of it. I've got a piece of the engine here. It is still sitting. It melted. This came off the mountain. Ron, bless his heart, Tim Talon, some other folks, brought every inconceivable detailed part from this airplane, which is just incredible. We will incorporate whatever we can without compromising safety from the original crash. Some of the non-structural elements, door latches, hinges, steps, to build this new fuselage. Here's a copy of the newspaper article. Within a day of the accident, charred body is found in wrecked plane, skull is fractured, man's body burned after blow was received, pilot reported to be improving. And there's quite a bit of detail about the accident. They've actually interviewed Grant Donaldson and described every little detail along here. Tragically, a very common event. These guys are crashing on a regular basis all over the country as airmail and early transport begins to evolve. This next photograph is again compliments of Ron Bartley. He's gone to Medford, Oregon for me. These are the notes, actually a copy of the notes taken the morning of the accident. There's a call from Canyonville at 11:30 in the morning, and they're at a pharmacy. And Donaldson is badly injured, he's badly burned, and they go into great detail about the accident, about this preacher and his daughter who've driven him to a Canyonville in his Model A that tragic morning. So this is an incredible piece of history. Ron has given me these station manager notes, manifests if you will, that go back 2 weeks prior and 2 weeks after the accident. There's just incredible notes. It's just a daily affair where these wonderful airplanes are coming in and out. There's one set of notes where they talk about a number of Army pilots in real hot ships, and they land, and they're probably flying P-12s, you can imagine, and they've stopped at the airmail headquarters there for fuel or a sandwich, and they've roared off, and this guy's just impressed with the formation, flying capability, and the engine noise and the performance. It's just all these little private little notes all over these records. The last two pictures we're going to discuss here briefly. This is a production picture at Boeing Aircraft. Again, they built 81 airplanes in a number of different variants. The A model, the B model, the C, and the 40B4. They have either the 1340 snap cap greaser type engine with 450 horse, and then later on the 1690 Hornets. You can see the mail compartment. Here's the front cabin, the flying position, wire braced tail affair, and they're all just lined up. These are some Liberty powered somethings. I don't even know what they are here in the background. It's just amazing. The final photograph we'll talk about, here's a picture taken sometime later. If we look at the date here, we're looking at June 1927, and then here's many years later. These are actually Boeing 40Bs. They've adopted the headrest. They're powered with 1690 Hornets, and you can see the two cabins, the flying position, and these airplanes incorporated a very large, long mast that had low-frequency radio capability. Here's some more Boeing fighters here in the background. They look like P-12s, which is just amazing. Real hot ships, right? We just talked about that. Okay, with that, we're going to shut the camera down again, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes with some construction details and our plan of attack over the next several years. We're going to start here at Station 1 and work our way down the airplane. It's important to appreciate 6 months into the project now, we have legal title. We've been issued essentially the data plate and the registration for 5339er, serial number 1043, Boeing 40C. We can actually build this airplane to conformity, have a standard airworthiness certificate when we're done. We'll move whatever superficial elements off of the crash to the new fuselage that we can. In 2 weeks, we'll have water jet fittings, which have been digitized on AutoCAD here in the hangar, which are out being fabricated as we speak. We've got all the material purchased. Matt Burrows will begin welding on the fuselage with a tentative fuselage completion of February 2001. The new fuselage will sit alongside this original fuselage. We'll move all the superficial elements, tabs, brackets, steps, insignificant structural elements over to the new fuselage for historical significance. Then once the tabbing, if you will, and minor brackets and the instrument panel is mounted and such, seat rails, rudder pedal brackets, the airplane will be painted, and we hope by next summer to have the basic cockpit furnishings, the panel, and the primary flight controls installed. That's the goal. As we look at the construction techniques here, the engine mount sits here, reference Station 1, and we've got 16 stations that work its way to the vertical tail post at the back of the airplane. Remember, we described it was 23 feet from the engine to the pilot's eyeballs, and another 13 feet from the front of his head to the tail end of the rudder on the airplane. So it's just a long, drawn-out, monstrous airplane that grosses at 6,200 pounds, cruises at 110 miles an hour, carries 4 passengers, and a significant load of mail in this area here. This is the mail pit. After that, a structural element, and then the 2 passenger cabins, followed by the flying position. What I want to direct your attention to here before we leave station number 1 is the welding technique. The airplane is constructed of 4130 chromoly tubing. It's arc welded, and that's noteworthy because the arc welding isn't particularly good. Arc welding in 1928 was a very new venture. Because of these arc welding limitations, there's some very interesting construction techniques that we're going to reference here in just a few minutes. So we're going to move down now to Station 3 and talk about those in a bit more detail. We're here at Station 3, and we're going to talk a little bit about the construction theme of the airplane. Again, it's a chromoly steel tube, gussets at virtually every tube intersection, and we talked about the airplane being arc welded. They don't have a lot of confidence in arc welding yet. We've uncovered a lot of testing and reports that say that whenever possible, they want these structural elements to be mechanically retained as well. And the theme is consistent here. Here's a gusset. It's 125 1/8-inch stock, washered on either side, and that gusset carries itself all the way through this vertical member and is welded down the backside as well. So this gusset's retained on the backside, on either side, and down the front, which is just amazing to me. We've got gussets at virtually every intersection, and I hold in my hand an example of about 30 3/16 chromoly gussets that intersect a lot of the fittings, 1/4-inch gussets for some of the wing and cabane supports, and then everything tapers down to 125 chromoly plates and gussets as we get back to the tail. I'm going to direct your attention here to a wing fitting. Correction, this is the landing gear fitting, the front position. And notice, and this is a consistent theme throughout the airplane, we've got a landing gear fitting which is elliptical, and it's got a hole cut in it to accommodate the longeron. So this is, in a way, self-jigging. These fittings are slipped over the longeron and welded on both sides, mechanically retained and held in position with the arc weld, which is kind of innovative. You notice that that repeats itself back here again for the wing fitting as well. We're going to move our way now back to station number 6. We're at station 6 now. We're just forward of the rear passenger compartment, and we've got a fitting again, just like the wing and the landing gear fitting, which completely encompasses or encapsulates the upper longeron, which is 1 inch. The cabane fitting intersects the jury strut fitting that continues down to the wing and supports the upper wing. This is the strut with the landing or flying wire, drag and a drag intersecting at that same point. But again, the same theme. They're not allowing the arc welds to carry any of these loads directly. Everything is encompassed or double welded to mechanically restrain things. On the other side of the airplane, which you can't see, this jury strut literally pulled out during the crash. And I've got an ice cold weld on both sides. It's a failed weld scenario. We see that in 3 or 4 places in the crash. So they didn't have a lot of confidence in arc welding. Obviously, we'll be TIG welding with modern welding techniques, the new fuselage. So I thought that was pretty noteworthy. We're going to move now to the final station 8-9, which is the rear cockpit, the flying position of the airplane. To help visualize the airplane, we've fabricated some crude reference points that help us decipher drawings and reverse engineer all of our efforts. We have acquired an original Boeing 40 seat, which was quite a treasure. The rivets are quite unique, germane to the period. It's in structurally beautiful shape. We're virtually having you double skin it, and it'll certainly be incorporated. I'm going to lift the seat away for just a moment. We've got a very crude presentation here of the instrument panel, details of which are still being defined. We know approximately this is the shape of the cockpit section, which travels all the way over the top of the passenger heads. On the left side wall, the throttle will be approximately in this location. We've got to build up a quadrant using World War II parts that'll be very similar to the original throttle quadrant. Back in this area, the wobble pump for developing fuel pressure, and this is the pivot point for the trim wheel. Forward of that, you can see we've got the rudder pedals positioned in their relative location. Noteworthy, we've got the original brackets which hang down that support the crank mechanism for the retractable landing lights in both wings. So this kind of gives you a tour of the fuselage, gives you some idea of what we'll be doing over the next year. We'll duplicate our effort a year from now, which we hope to be significant. Year one, of course, being the fuselage. Year two, finishing the cockpit furnishings, wiring, control systems and such. Year three, we begin earnest effort on wing building. As of a few hours ago, we've also purchased a second airplane, which, believe it or not, has a complete new tail assembly, which is remarkable. Many more drawings, many parts that will be incorporated in this airplane as well. It's coming out of Houston, Texas, and should be here by Christmas of 2000. Great effort that way. I want to thank Bill Hill in advance for making that available to us, and a number of people that have helped us already. This is never a one-man show, and we want to build this thing to a tribute of this area. We're going to talk about some of the instruments we have and details, and we'll be finished here. Okay, behind me is a shelf of the elements we have already collected for the airplane. Again, when this fuselage gets done, we'll really have something we can sink our teeth into. We've had a number of things donated for the airplane already. John Bevan donated nearly 600 feet of chromoly tubing. Bill Allen from San Diego has donated a beautiful mag switch with this open bail germane to the 1920s. We've got a turn of bank indicator, tachometer. Larry Tobin has donated a brand new beautiful primer. I've got all of the knobs, controls, circuit breakers, and switches for the electrical system. Jim Miller's donated a period brass venturi, which will be mounted on one of the cabane struts. And something of interest here, which is really kind of neat, both of the cabins include a telephone affair, so that the passengers can literally communicate with the pilot via this telephone affair. There's actually a placard in each of the cabins which say, please don't throw objects from the windows, it could be dangerous. Remain seated at all times, don't open the door, and if you want to talk to the pilot, please lift the telephone and push to talk. And when you key this microphone, there's a light that lights up on the instrument panel, and the pilot switches over and knows somebody wants to talk to him. So we'll certainly have these telephones in both cabins as well. Again, these are never a one-man effort. Dan Dahl, for instance, has done all of our AutoCAD DXF file translation for the water jet work on all the fittings. Matt Burrows will do our welding. And again, all these people add up to a success story. So thanks for supporting the Boeing 40 effort, and we'll see you in a year with hopefully some progress made. Thank you much.